At this point in the season, do you believe a first-time team can make the playoff? And if so, who? So Daniel's talking about teams that have never made the playoff, a la Cincinnati last year, Michigan last year. We had 2 out of the 4 last year that were newbies, first-timers. The first thing I think we need to do is remind you who's made the playoff. Because some people, including us earlier today, some people have forgotten that Florida State has made the playoff. It was way back in the day, first year actually, 2014. Oregon has made the playoff. Washington has made it. Michigan State's made it. Cincy last year made it. Notre Dame a couple times. Georgia a couple times. So you remember those. But I just want to remind you, if I don't mention Washington here, it's because they've already made it. Florida State's because they've already made it. Who hasn't made it that's got the best shot? Well, the current odds to win the national championship are like this. Bama and Georgia are co-favorites to win it all. Ohio State's right behind them. And then there's a big drop-off. And then it's Clemson at 4th, USC at 5th, and Michigan at 6th. So 5 of the top 6 right now would be repeat playoff appearance types. USC is the only one that hasn't made it before that's listed up there near the top of the odds to win it all. So obviously USC has an opportunity to pull this off, because if they go undefeated, or if they just have one loss and they're the Pac-12 champ, and they're USC, it matters. Trust me, they're in. I don't have much of a question about that. They're in. If they win the Pac-12 with one loss or less, I think they're in. Penn State is in an interesting situation. Let's say that they've got a stretch coming up at Penn State where they play at Michigan, they got Minnesota at home, and they got Ohio State at home. Check the schedule out. Let's say they go 2-1 in that stretch. Let's say they beat Michigan. Let's say they beat Minnesota. They lose to Ohio State. And let's say that's their only loss. But Ohio State runs the table. So Penn State can't go to the Big Ten championship game. I would venture to think that a one-loss Penn State, whose only loss is to probably the eventual Big Ten champ, I think they've got a pretty good shot there. Now, that's going to be a tough stretch to go 2-1 against, especially with how good Minnesota looks now, but not impossible. They've already gotten through a fairly treacherous opening start to their season. So I think Penn State's in this conversation. Utah, we've talked about them. Utah has no margin for error, but Utah's still sitting there. USC's got to come to them in a few weeks. I think Utah, a one-loss Pac-12 champ, absolutely in, especially because their loss is on the road to an SEC team, and where they could have easily scheduled down in week 1 and not lost the game. So I don't think they're going to be punished all that much for that. The interesting team in this whole thing is Minnesota, because Minnesota is over there in the Big Ten West. So unlike Penn State, they don't have a bunch of Michigans and Ohio States in their division. So with Minnesota, man, they look ultra impressive. They already went to Michigan State and got a win. And their schedule, by the way, does not have Ohio State on it. It does not have Michigan on it. Their toughest remaining game is at Penn State. Whiteout game, by the way, at Penn State. I'm already dressed for it. And that is the 22nd of October. Elsewhere, if you're listening on podcast, you start to realize how real this thing could get. They play Purdue this weekend, double-digit favorite. They go to Illinois, at Penn State, I just mentioned. Rutgers, at Nebraska. Northwestern, Iowa, at Wisconsin. That team right there, Minnesota, even if they lose at Penn State, they will win the Big Ten West. They will go to Indianapolis, and they'll be a tough out for someone. My question becomes this. What if, let's just allow our minds to wander for a second, what if they're undefeated and they go to the Big Ten championship game and they lose competitively to Ohio State? What if that were to happen? What kind of shot does Minnesota have? Can you believe that sentence just came out of my mouth in this show? What kind of shot does Minnesota have? Minnesota's a good team. They're rated in the JP poll. They're a good team. NC State is another team. They've got Clemson on deck this week, so we'll know a whole lot more about them after that. So I think those are the teams. Southern Cal, Penn State, Utah, Minnesota, NC State. None of them have ever made the playoff before. Those are the teams that I'm looking at. So I still think we've got a half-decent shot at having some fresh blood in the playoff this year. Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure and leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.